The great chamber of the Galactic Council stretched outward like a massive bowl carved from living crystal. And within its curved walls sat the representatives of 847 species from across the Orion arm of the galaxy. For 12,000 years this chamber had witnessed the rise and fall of empires, the signing of treaties that shaped the fates of trillions, and the careful dance of diplomacy that kept the peace among species who might otherwise tear each other apart today. Would be different. Ambassador Chen Wei-Lin stood at the central speaking platform, a small human woman surrounded by holographic projections of alien faces that towered above her like giants looking down at an insect. She had served as humanity's voice in this chamber for 11 years, and in that time she had learned to read the subtle signs of alien emotion that most humans never noticed. Right now she could see fear in the way the Tesseri delegates kept their tentacles perfectly still. She could see excitement in the rapid color shifts of the Morath Elder's skin, and she could see smug satisfaction in the four gleaming eyes of High Speaker Vethaner of the Vethrani hegemony. The Vethrani had ruled their corner of the galaxy for 6,000 years, and they had grown fat on conquest and intimidation. Their war fleet was legendary. Their weapons technology was among the most advanced in known space, and their diplomatic strategy had never changed in all those millennia. They found what they wanted. They demanded it. And they took it today. They wanted the Kepler Corridor. The Vethrani hegemony has determined that the region designated as the Kepler Corridor represents a critical security interest, High Speaker Vethaner announced, his translated voice booming through the chamber with practiced authority. The 17 human colony worlds within this region must be evacuated within 90 standard cycles, and all human military and civilian assets must be withdrawn. He paused to let his words sink in, watching the human ambassador with the patient gaze of a predator who already knew how this hunt would end. This is not a matter for negotiation, he continued, and Ambassador Chun could hear the pleasure in his voice even through the translation matrix. The hegemony recognizes humanity's contributions to galactic civilization, limited though they may be, and we are prepared to offer fair compensation for the inconvenience of relocation. Murmurs rippled through the chamber as delegates turned to watch the human response. Everyone knew what would happen next. It was what always happened. When the Vethrani made demands of younger species, the human would protest, perhaps even raise her voice in theatrical outrage. Then she would negotiate for better terms, buying time while her government quietly began the evacuation. Within a year, the Kepler Corridor would belong to the hegemony, and humanity would learn the same lesson that dozens of species had learned before them. Some powers were simply too great to oppose. Ambassador Chun stood in silence for a long moment, and those watching closely might have noticed something strange in her expression. She did not look afraid. She did not look defeated. If anything, she looked almost relieved, as if a weight had been lifted from her shoulders. High Speaker, she said, and her voice was calm and clear. I must thank you for your directness, as it saves us both a great deal of time. Vethaner's eyes narrowed slightly at her tone, but he inclined his massive head in acknowledgement. The hegemony believes in clarity, he said. Then allow me to be equally clear, Ambassador Chum replied. And she turned to address not just the Vethrani delegation, but the entire chamber. The answer is no. Silence fell across the chamber like a physical weight. Several translation systems flickered as they attempted to process what surely must have been an error. The Tesseri delegates began to whisper urgently among themselves, and the color of the Morath Elder's skin shifted to a shade that Ambassador Chun had never seen. Before High Speaker Vethaner stared at her for 3 full seconds before responding. I do not believe you understand the situation, he said slowly, speaking each word with exaggerated care, as if addressing a particularly dim child. The hegemony is not asking for your permission, and we are not seeking your approval. and I am not asking for yours. Ambassador Chen replied. Humanity will not abandon our colonies, and we will not surrender our people to your occupation. The chamber erupted into chaos. Delegates shouted over each other in a dozen different languages, and the translation systems struggled to keep up with the sudden flood of voices. Counselor Dexnari of the collective rose from her seat and demanded order, while the Amirian delegation began drafting an emergency motion for humanity's expulsion from the council. Through it all, Ambassador Chen remained perfectly still at the center of the storm. High Speaker Vethner raised one massive hand, and gradually the chamber fell silent again. You are aware, he said, and now his voice had lost its smooth diplomatic polish, that the hegemony maintains a war fleet of over 300 vessels in the region. I am, Ambassador Chen said, and you are aware that humanity's combined military forces number less than 100 ships. I am. Then you are also aware that any conflict between our species would result in the complete destruction of your civilization. Ambassador Chen smiled, and something in that expression made several delegates draw back in their seats. High Speaker, I grew up in a city called Nanjing, she said, and if you knew what that name meant to my people, you would understand why your threats do not frighten me. She stepped forward, and somehow the small human woman seemed to fill the entire chamber with her presence. The hegemony has 90 cycles to remove its fleet from the Kepler corridor, she announced. If a single Vethrani warship remains in our space after that deadline, humanity will consider it an act of war and respond accordingly. You would die, Vethner said, and for the first time there was genuine confusion in his voice. Perhaps, Ambassador Chen replied, but we would not die quietly, and we would not die alone, and when the histories are written, they will remember that humanity stood when others knelt. She turned and walked out of the chamber, leaving 847 species staring after her in stunned silence. The Galactic Council had stood for 12,000 years, and in all that time, no one had ever refused the Vethranian till today in his private chambers. The Morath Elder watched the human ambassador's departure and felt something stir in his ancient hearts. It was a sensation he had not experienced in over 1,000 years. He believed the humans called it hope. The emergency session began 6 hours after Ambassador Chen's departure, and the chamber was more crowded than it had been in living memory. Species who rarely attended council meetings had sent their most senior representatives, and the observation galleries were packed with journalists, historians, and curious citizens from across the Orion Arm. Everyone wanted to see what would happen next. Counselor Dexnari opened the session with a formal motion to censure humanity for what she called reckless endangerment of galactic peace, and the Amirian delegation immediately seconded the motion. The humans have been members of this council for less than 50 years, Dexnari declared, her crystalline form pulsing with agitation. In that time they have contributed little of value and caused no end of disruption with their strange customs and aggressive tendencies. She turned to face the empty platform where Ambassador Chen had stood hours before. Now they threatened to plunge this entire sector into war over a handful of insignificant colony worlds, and we are expected to simply watch as they destroy themselves and drag others down with them. The Vethrani delegation nodded in approval, and High Speaker Vethner rose to address the chamber. The hegemony has no desire for war, he said, and his voice was smooth with false regret. We sought only to secure our borders through peaceful negotiation, and the human response has been nothing short of madness. He spread his forearms wide in a gesture of helplessness. What can be done with a species that refuses to see reason, that rejects the wisdom of older and greater civilizations, that would rather die than accept the natural order of things? The chamber buzzed with agreement. and it seemed that the matter would be settled quickly. Humanity would be condemned. The Vethrani would be given tacit approval to proceed, and the galaxy would continue as it always had. Then the Morath Elder rose from his seat. The chamber fell instantly silent. For the Morath were the oldest species in the VS Council, and they almost never spoke in open session. Their elder had not addressed the full assembly in over 200 years. I would hear more before we pass judgment, the ancient being said, and his voice was like wind through dead leaves. The council has archives containing the histories of all member species, and I believe we would benefit from examining the human record more closely. High Speaker Vethner shifted uncomfortably in his seat. With respect, Elder, the human record is brief and unremarkable, and there is nothing in it that would change the fundamental calculus of this situation. Then you will not object to its examination, the Morath Elder replied. And there was something in his tone that made Vethner fall silent. The archives were opened, and the history of humanity was projected across the chamber walls for all to see. At first, the delegates watched with bored indifference, expecting nothing more than the standard progression of a young species. They saw humans discover fire and develop language. They saw the first cities rise along river valleys. They saw the invention of writing and mathematics and philosophy. Then they saw the wars. The Tesseri delegate was the first to react, letting out a high-pitched whistle of alarm as the casualty figures scrolled across the display. This cannot be accurate, she said. There must be an error in the translation. But there was no error. The delegates watched in growing horror as human history unfolded before them. They saw empires rise and fall in floods of blood. They saw humans slaughter each other over territory, over resources, over religion, over ideas. They saw weapons evolve from clubs to swords to guns to bombs that could level entire cities in a single flash of light. They developed nuclear weapons, the Emirian delegate whispered, and his voice trembled with disbelief. They developed weapons capable of destroying their own planet, and they used them against each other. Twice, the Morath Elder confirmed, and then they built more. The chamber had grown very quiet. High Speaker Vethner stared at the display with something that looked almost like fear. How are they still alive? He asked. And for once, his voice held no arrogance. How did they not destroy themselves? That is the question. Is it not? The Morath Elder said. They had every reason to, and every opportunity. And yet here they stand. He turned to face the Vethrani delegation directly. You believe the humans will surrender because your fleet is larger and your weapons are stronger. But you are making a calculation that does not account for who they are. The display shifted to show human art and literature. Stories of heroes who stood alone against impossible odds. Songs celebrating those who died rather than submit. Monuments built to honor the fallen in wars that everyone knew were unwinnable from the start. They do not calculate the way we do. The Morath Elder continued. They do not weigh lives against territory and choose the rational path, because to them some things are worth more than survival. Then they are fools, Vethner said. But his voice lacked conviction. Perhaps, the Morath Elder replied, or perhaps we have been wise for so long that we have forgotten what it means to believe in something. The vote on censure was delayed behind closed doors. Delegates gathered in small groups to discuss what they had seen. And for the first time in thousands of years, the Vethrani found themselves facing something they did not understand. The humans were not backing down. They were not negotiating. They were not even bluffing. Because the Morath Elder was right about one thing: humans did not bluff. They simply did not know how to quit in her quarters aboard the human diplomatic vessel. Ambassador Chun received reports from Earth and allowed herself a small smile. The council was afraid, and fear was the first step toward wisdom now. They just needed to survive long enough to prove that humanity's courage was more than just foolishness. The clock was ticking, and the galaxy was watching. And somewhere in the Kepler corridor, 2 billion human colonists were preparing to make a stand that would change everything. 72 hours is not a long time when you are preparing for war on Earth. The great cities fell silent as emergency broadcasts interrupted. Every screen and speaker on the planet, President Okonkwo addressed the global population with calm determination, explaining what was happening and what might be coming. "Our colonies in the Kepler corridor are our people," she said, and her voice carried across continents and oceans. "They are our brothers and sisters, our children and grandchildren, and we will not abandon them to conquest." She paused, and when she spoke again, her voice was harder. "The Vethrani believe that we will break because we are small and young and weak. But they have misunderstood something fundamental about who we are. We are the children of those who survived ice ages and plagues and world wars. We are the descendants of those who crossed oceans in wooden ships and walked on the surface of the moon. We are humanity, and we do not surrender across the planet." Recruitment centers reported lines stretching around the block factories that had been producing consumer goods began retooling. For military production, scientists and engineers worked without sleep to prepare systems that had been secretly developed for exactly this moment in orbit. The human fleet began its journey toward the Kepler corridor. Admiral James Okafor stood on the bridge of the carrier, Defiance, and watched the stars streak past as his ships accelerated to faster than light speeds. His fleet numbered 47 vessels, and intelligence reports indicated that the Vethrani had over 300 ships waiting for them by any reasonable calculation. He was leading his people to their deaths, but Admiral Okafor had not risen to his position by accepting reasonable calculations. He had spent his entire career studying the wars of human history, learning from the victories of commanders who had faced impossible odds and found ways to win. He knew that numbers were not everything, that superior technology could be overcome by superior tactics, and that the will to fight often mattered more than the weapons you carried. He also knew something that the Vethrani did not. Humanity had been preparing for this moment since the day they joined the Galactic Council. They had looked at the galaxy and seen a universe of predators, species that had survived by conquering and consuming others. They had studied the Vethrani and recognized the pattern immediately, because they had seen it before in their own history, and so they had prepared. The ships in Admiral Okafor's fleet were not what they appeared to be. Civilian freighters that traveled alongside his warships were not carrying supplies. The mining vessels that had been coincidentally operating in the Kepler corridor were not there to extract, or in the colony defense stations that orbited every human world in the region were not the simple shield generators that the Vethrani sensors had identified. Humanity had learned long ago that the best weapon was one your enemy did not know existed in the Kepler corridor itself. The colonists received both the Vethrani evacuation order and the message from Earth within minutes of each other. Most of them had already made their decision before either message arrived. These were people who had left everything behind to build new lives on distant worlds, who had carved homes out of hostile environments through sheer determination and hard work. They were not the kind of people who ran away on the colony world of New Guangzhou. A woman named Sarah Chun gathered her family in their small farmhouse and explained what was happening. Her children were too young to fully understand, but her husband David met her eyes and nodded slowly. "We stay," he said. And it was not a question. "We stay," Sarah agreed. Across the corridor, similar scenes played out on every human world. Civilians who had never held a tail weapon began training with the local defense forces. Engineers worked to convert agricultural equipment into makeshift weapons. Platforms, teachers, and doctors. And farmers transformed overnight into soldiers. Not because they wanted to fight, but because they refused to let others fight alone back at the Galactic Council. The delegates watched the human preparations with a mixture of horror and fascination. They are actually going to do it. Counselor Dexnari whispered to her aide, "They are going to fight a war they cannot win." The Morath elder observed in silence. But his ancient eyes missed nothing. He saw the fear in the Vethrani delegation. Fear that they tried to hide behind arrogance and bluster. He saw the calculation in the eyes of neutral species, weighing the costs and benefits of intervention, and he saw something else. Something that surprised him. He saw admiration. Tesseri delegate had stopped calling for human censure. The Kelvari representative had quietly begun moving her people's fleet toward a position that could support either side, even the Amerians, who had been among the loudest voices condemning humanity, had fallen strangely silent. Something was changing in the council. A shift in the ancient patterns of power and submission that had governed galactic politics for millennia. The Vethrani had always won because no one believed they could be beaten. And that belief had become self-fulfilling, but the humans did not share that belief. They looked at the Vethrani fleet and saw not an unstoppable force, but a challenge to be overcome. They looked at the odds against them and saw not certain defeat, but an opportunity to prove what they were made of. And as the clock counted down toward the deadline, species across the Orion Arm began to wonder if perhaps they had been wrong about what was possible. Perhaps the Vethrani could be beaten. Perhaps courage could triumph over calculation. Perhaps, after 12,000 years of submission and fear, it was finally time for something to change. The final hours ticked away, and the galaxy held its breath. And humanity prepared to show the universe what it meant to refuse to back down. The Vethrani fleet hung in space like a cloud of angry metal. 340 warships arranged in perfect formation around the massive flagship, Eternal Dominion High Commander. Vethkrol stood on the bridge and watched the countdown timer with growing impatience. The humans had been given their deadline. And now that deadline had passed, and still there was no sign of surrender. "Scan the approach vectors again," he ordered. And his tactical officer obeyed without question. "Nothing." "Aye, Commander," the officer reported. "No human vessels within sensor range." Vethkrol allowed himself a thin smile. Perhaps the humans had finally seen reason. Perhaps they had realized that their brave words meant nothing against the reality of Vethrani power. "Begin the advance toward New Guangzhou," he commanded. "We will secure the largest colony first and use it as an example for the others." The fleet began to move. 340 ships gliding forward in perfect unison. And Vethkrol felt the familiar thrill of conquest building in his chest. This would be easy. This would be quick. This would teach the galaxy what happened to species that forgot their place. Then the stars in front of them twisted and tore, and the human fleet dropped out of faster than light, traveled directly in their path. Vethkrol's smile vanished as he counted the enemy vessels. 47 ships, his tactical officer reported, and there was confusion in his voice. "They brought 47 ships against our 340. They are insane," Vethkrol said. But even as he spoke, he felt something cold settle in his stomach. "All vessels, advance and engage." The Vethrani fleet surged forward, and the first wave of warships opened fire with plasma cannons that could melt through armor like water through sand. The shots should have torn the human formation apart. Instead, the human ships simply were not there. They scattered in patterns that the Vethrani targeting computers could not predict, moving with a speed and coordination that seemed almost impossible. Admiral Okafor stood on the bridge of the Defiance and watched the battle unfold with grim satisfaction. "Execute pattern Thermopylae," he ordered. the human fleet reformed into a tight wedge and drove directly at the heart of the Vethrani formation. And as they moved, the civilian freighters that had traveled with them began to open their cargo bays. Inside were not supplies. Inside were missiles. Thousands of them, each one carrying a warhead designed by human engineers who had studied every weakness in Vethrani shield technology. The first wave hit the Vethrani vanguard like a hammer, striking glass explosions bloomed across the void as ship after ship was torn apart, and the perfect Vethrani formation shattered into chaos. "What is happening?" Vethkral screamed, watching his tactical display fill with damage reports. How are they doing this? No one had an answer. Human ships continued their impossible dance through the Vethrani fleet, and everywhere they went destruction followed. The mining vessels that had been operating in the Kepler corridor emerged from behind asteroids and opened fire with weapons that should not have existed. MASS drivers and particle beams that punched through Vethrani armor like it was paper. The colony defense stations activated their true systems, and suddenly the space around each human world was filled with autonomous drones that swarmed the Vethrani. Ships like angry insects, and the human warships themselves fought with a ferocity that the Vethrani had never encountered. They did not retreat when damaged. They did not surrender when surrounded. They fought until they could not fight anymore. And even then they found ways to hurt their enemies. The destroyer Salamis, crippled and burning, rammed itself into a Vethrani cruiser and detonated its reactor, the carrier Zhang. He launched its final wave of fighters, even as its hull broke apart around it. The frigate La Stand lived up to its name, holding a critical position for 17 minutes against overwhelming odds until reinforcements arrived in 3 hours. The Vethrani lost 200 ships. Their perfect fleet was scattered and broken, their legendary warriors dead or fleeing, and their high commander was staring at his displays in disbelief as the flagship Eternal Dominion shuddered under human fire. "Surrender." Vethkral croaked into his communication system. "We surrender." The human weapons fell silent, and Admiral Okafor's face appeared on the Vethrani screens. "You will withdraw every ship from human space immediately," the Admiral said, and his voice was cold and hard. "You will release all prisoners and return all seized property, and you will inform your government that if a single Vethrani vessel ever threatens a human world again, we will not stop at your fleet. We will come to your homeworld, and we will show you what humanity does to those who try to take what is ours." Vethkral could only nod, and as his surviving ships turned to flee, he looked back at the human fleet. They had brought 47 ships against 340, and they had won not by luck, not by accident, but by being exactly what they had always claimed to be: species that refused to back down. The battle reports reached the Galactic Council within hours, and as the delegates watched the footage, their certainty about the natural order of the universe crumbled. Like sand in a storm, the Vethrani were not invincible. They could be beaten, and if they could be beaten, then perhaps everything the Council had believed for 12,000 years was wrong. In her quarters, Ambassador Chen received the news and allowed herself a moment of quiet grief for the ships and crews that had been lost. Then she straightened her uniform and prepared to return to the council chamber. The battle was won, but the real work was just beginning. The Galactic Council chamber had never been so quiet. Ambassador Chen Weilin stood once again at the central speaking platform, but this time the alien faces looking down at her wore very different expressions. There was no contempt now, no dismissal, no bored indifference. There was only shock and something that looked very much like fear. The Vethrani delegation sat in diminished numbers, their seats half empty after the losses at Kepler Station. High Speaker Vethnar was gone, recalled in disgrace, and his replacement was a younger official who kept his eyes fixed on the Florin spoke only when directly addressed. For 6,000 years, the Vethrani had been the most feared power in the Orion Arm. In 3 hours that reputation had been shattered. The Council recognizes Ambassador Chun of the Human Confederacy, Councilor Thexnari announced, and her crystalline voice carried none of the hostility it had held just days before. Ambassador Chen stepped forward and looked out at the assembled delegates. She saw curiosity in the Tesseri, calculation in the Emirians, and something approaching hope in the smaller species who had spent millennia living in the shadow of greater powers. 3 days ago, I stood in this chamber and told the Vethrani that humanity would not abandon our people, she said. Many of you thought we were foolish, and some of you thought we were bluffing, and nearly all of you believed that we would be destroyed. She paused to let the words sink in. You were wrong. The chamber remained silent, and Ambassador Chun continued, I am not here to gloat over our victory, and I am not here to make threats against those who doubted us. I am here because what happened at Kepler Station was not just a battle between two species. It was a turning point for this entire council. She turned to face the Morath Elder, who watched her with ancient, unreadable eyes. For 12,000 years, this council has operated on a simple principle, she said. The strong take what they want, and the weak give way, and that is called peace. But it is not peace. It is submission. It is fear dressed up in diplomatic language. And it has allowed species like the Vethrani to prey on others without consequence for far too long. The new Vethrani representative shifted uncomfortably in his seat, but did not speak. Humanity did not come to this council to become another victim. Ambassador Chung continued, we did not travel across the stars and build colonies on distant worlds just to hand them over to the first bully who demanded them. We came here to find partners. We came here to find allies. We came here to help build something better than the galaxy we found. She spread her hands wide, encompassing the entire chamber. The Vethrani tested us, and now they know what we are capable of. But that knowledge comes with a choice. You can see us as a threat, another aggressive species to be feared and contained. And if that is what you choose, then we will accept it. We will defend our people against anyone who threatens them, regardless of the cost. Or you can see us as what we truly are, a species that believes in standing up for the weak, a species that refuses to abandon our friends, a species that would rather die fighting than live on our knees. She let the silence stretch for a long moment before speaking. Again, every species in this chamber has faced the choice that we faced, she said. You have all stood at the crossroads and decided whether to fight or to submit. And most of you chose to submit because the odds were against you. I do not blame you for that choice. Survival is a powerful instinct, and it takes something more than logic to stand against impossible odds. But I want you to know that you do not have to make that choice alone anymore. The Morath Elder rose slowly from his seat, and once again the chamber fell into absolute stillness. You speak of alliance, the ancient being said. You speak of standing together against those who would prey upon the weak. These are bold words. But words are easy. What do you offer to prove them true? Ambassador Chun met his gaze without flinching. Offer our ships to defend any member of this council who is threatened by aggression, she said. I offer our technology to any species who wishes to build their own strength. I offer our friendship to anyone who is willing to stand beside us. She turned to face the Vethrani delegation directly, and I offer forgiveness to those who have wronged us. If they are willing to change. The new Vethrani representative looked up sharply, confusion evident in his 4 eyes. The hegemony attacked our colonies, he said slowly. We killed your people and threatened your worlds. And you offer us forgiveness. I offer you a choice, Ambassador Chen replied. You can continue as you have always been. taking what you want and crushing those who resist. And eventually, you will face another species that refuses to break, or you can become something better. You can learn that there is more to strength than the ability to destroy. You can join us in building a galaxy where species work together instead of against each other. The choice is yours. The chamber buzzed with whispered conversations as delegates turned to their aides and advisors. This was not how galactic politics worked. Victors did not offer mercy to the defeated. They demanded tribute and territory and submission, but the humans were not demanding anything. They were offering something that many species had forgotten existed: hope. The Morith elder raised his hand for silence, and when he spoke, his voice carried a weight that made even the oldest delegates pay attention. I have lived for over 2,000 years, he said. I have seen empires rise and fall, and I have watched this council struggle to maintain order in a galaxy that seems determined to tear itself apart. In all that time, I have never seen a species like humanity. You are violent and unpredictable and often foolish, but you are also brave and loyal and capable of a generosity that defies logic. He turned to face the full assembly. I believe the humans are offering us something genuine, he said. I believe they mean what they say, and I believe that if we are wise enough to accept their offer, this council may finally become what it was always meant to be. The vote was called, and one by one, the species of the Galactic Council made their choice, the motion to accept humanity's proposal for a mutual defense alliance. Passed by the largest margin in council history, even the Vethrai voted in favor as the chamber erupted in celebration. Ambassador Chen allowed herself a small smile. Humanity had come to the stars, expecting to find monsters, and they had found them. But they had also found something else. They had found a galaxy full of species who had forgotten how to hope, how to fight, how to believe in something greater than survival. And humanity had reminded them sometimes the only way to win is to refuse to back down. Sometimes courage matters more than calculation, and sometimes if you stand firm when everyone expects you to break, you can change everything. The galaxy would never be the same. And that was exactly what humanity had intended all along. The end.